Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Gone Birding, South Africa's Diverse Delights, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Lorraine Doyle. Due to technical issues, Lorraine's webcam will not be active during the presentation. Thank you so much for being here today. Over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Rob. I apologize for the lack of webcam, but yeah, it just unfortunately puts too much of a strain on our bandwidth here in South Africa. So we also noted a little earlier that sometimes there is a bit of a delay in the slides that I can see on my screen coming up for you. So if it looks like I'm talking about something that's completely unrelated to what you can see, perhaps, I don't know, Rob, maybe you can just give me some kind of a signal just to know that maybe I need to slow it down a little bit. So I've been birding for many years now, and I'm passionate about birds. I'm not really what you call a twitcher. People ask me what my life list is, and I don't really have one. For me, it's more about what the birds do and how they fit into their environment, and also the fact that they just happen to be incredibly beautiful and photogenic. And also when you're on a safari and the big and the hairies are not being very cooperative, there's usually always a bird or three around that you can have a look at. So this little chap that you're seeing on the screen now, this is a little bee eater, and it's actually the world's smallest bee eater. So we do have others in Southern Africa. The European bee eater migrates here. We get a white-fronted bee eater, carmine, but this little chap is resident and actually endemic to Southern Africa. And like all bee eaters, it does eat bees, not only bees, other insects as well, but it has a unique way of dispatching bees. It will actually take them in its bill and slap them around until the sting is detached from the insect, and then it will swallow it. So it doesn't ever stand any risk of being stung as it's swallowing its meal. So that was just because there is no picture, or I'm not on screen. For those of you who don't know me, that was just a very quick picture. And what should come up in your screen now is a number of very small pictures of different birds. And this was just to give you an idea of the variety and the bright coloration of the birds that we have in this part of the world. There's basically over 900 recorded species in Southern Africa. So choosing which ones to select can be a little bit challenging. So I've just gone and chosen maybe some typical ones along with some less obvious ones, but all of which have incredibly interesting characteristics about them, not only their beautiful coloration. So the bird that's come up now should be what we call a lilac-breasted roller. And it's a majestic bird with very heavy black bill and these beautiful, beautiful bright blue wings, especially in flight. And what's really interesting to me about bird pigmentation is that many of the blue pigments that we see are actually not true pigments. They're actually structural coloration. And it's essentially caused by the physics, if you will, of what's known as Tyndall scattering. And so within the bird's feather, it has keratin, which is like your fingernails, which gives it structure. And it also has little pockets of air that are trapped. And as a result of the fact that blue light is very short wavelength, it's reflected much more easily than other colors. And as a result of that, you get this beautiful blue coloration. Very often, if it's very vivid and bright, it's underlain by dark pigment, by melanin. And that just gives you an intensification of the blue coloration that you see. The bird gets its common name roller because of the amazing display that the males do to try and attract the females. So they actually fly up into the air, close their wings and start diving for Earth, and then open up their wings and do the seesaw rolling type of action, all the while making a not particularly attractive sound. So we don't have true songbirds like you do in Europe and probably also in North America. Most of our birds, yes, they are tuneful, but they're not true songbirds. And some of them, like this lilac-breasted roller, got all the looks, but unfortunately none of the voice. So very pretty, but best he doesn't open his mouth. The bird that's come up now should be a very long-legged black and white. This is a bird called a secretary bird. And the reason for including it is just that it has a very unique way of dispatching its prey. So it will eat anything from small rodents, some large insects, but it also will take down and consume quite large snakes. And the way that it dispatches them is it actually stomps on it with those very, very powerful legs. And that is the way in which it actually dispatches its prey before eating it. And as you can see, it's got a very strong predator-like bill. And so, yeah, that is its main food is anything that it's able to subdue, largely by standing on it. The bird that's come up now is often referred to as a flying banana, or Zazu from The Lion King. So this is a southern yellow-billed hornbill. And hornbills are incredibly unique birds, mainly in terms of their nesting behavior. So they are whole nesters, and for the duration of the incubation period, the female is actually sealed into the hole. So she will go into the hole in the tree, lay the eggs. The entrance is then sealed by the male using mud to leave only a small slit through which he will feed her. She then sheds all her feathers, so becomes essentially completely naked. We think partly to make space inside the cavity. It also possibly serves as some sort of insulation for the eggs. But obviously she's now incredibly vulnerable, and it has to be a situation where the male has to come back to feed her. Otherwise, she will not break out, so she actually will perish inside that hole. Once the eggs have hatched, the female will then, with the help of the male, break out, having fully refeathered herself during that period, and then they will reseal the hole and continue to feed the fledgling chicks through the hole until they are ready to fledge completely. So it's a very unique behavior. Not all hornbills do it. The very large southern ground hornbill does not. but most of the other hornbills do. So they also have incredibly unique relationships with other creatures. So they'll often forage alongside little dwarf mongoose, following them around as the little mongoose scamper through the grass and picking up the insects that they flush. And then if there's a predator, then the hornbill will alarm for it and alert the mongooses that there's a problem, and they'll then dive for their burrow. So yeah, a mutualistic, symbiotic relationship that's going on between two different animals. So I mentioned southern ground hornbill. This is just a very quick shot of a southern ground hornbill. They are endangered, largely due to habitat loss. They need very big trees in which to nest, and many of those trees have either been pushed over by elephants in conserved areas, or outside of conservation areas, they've been chopped down. What's also against these birds is they usually will, between a group, so they're social, they will only raise one chick every 9 years. So they have a very low reproductive rate. One of the ways in which we've tried to increase their population numbers is they will lay 2 eggs, but they demonstrate Cain and Abel syndrome, which means that the first chick will hatch quite significantly sooner than the second chick, and will usually kill the second chick in order to increase its chances of survival. So there is a project running in South Africa called the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project, run by Dr. Lucy Kemp. And what Lucy and her team are doing is they take the second egg and they incubate it in an incubator, and then utilizing a non-touch method. So these birds, the hatchlings, do not imprint on humans. They then raise the second chick to try and increase the population numbers. We've also got similar projects with some of our endangered cranes, the blue crane, the national bird of South Africa. We also have projects similar to that to try and increase our blue crane numbers as well. So people often think that these birds are incredibly ugly. I don't think that they're particularly ugly. I think perhaps it's more the fact of what they do that makes people not so fond of them. But they are absolutely crucial to ecosystem functioning. Without them, we would have rotten carcasses left in the veld. Disease would become a problem, infestations of animals like flies. So they really do play an incredibly crucial role in making sure that ecosystems are kept clean. What's interesting about them is if you have a look at the one perched on the carcass, you'll see how flat its feet are. And unlike other predators which swoop down and grab their prey, so they often have much more curved toes, vultures spend a lot of time hopping around on the ground. And so they have these flattened feet that are adapted to that lifestyle. You'll also notice that they have relatively small heads and quite bare necks. And that's because they insert their heads into the carcasses. And obviously that gets quite messy. And if they were heavily feathered, that would then be very difficult for them to clean. Just at the base of the neck, though, you can see what almost looks like a ruff. And what's interesting about that is that these birds can soar at incredibly high altitudes. And they can actually puff that ruff up to act as a form of insulation. So the bare skin helps when they're on the ground and it's hot, and also not to get dirty. And then the ruff of feathers around the neck actually helps insulate when they're soaring. They have extraordinary eyesight. they can see kills from at least 1 kilometer or more away. And they also have these very heavily adapted bills that you can see, obviously for tearing and ripping. These specific vultures don't usually break into the carcass itself. There's a bigger vulture called a lappet-faced vulture, and it's the lappet-faced vulture that usually will open a carcass, and it's then followed by a sequence of other vulture species, which then help clean up the carcass. So this bird is our largest. It's called a Corey bustard. It occurs mainly in the drier western parts of the country and has this beautiful cryptic coloration. So if you have a look at the bush to the left of the bird, you'll see that if it was to be standing in there, it would be very, very difficult indeed to spot it. And that's obviously an anti-predator strategy.
Lorraine, this is Rob. Our slides are a little bit delayed. We are still on the previous slide, so we can't see the bush right now. You may have to try advancing the slides a little bit before you're ready to, maybe a minute or two, because the slides are sticking for about a minute or so.
For about a minute, okay. Are you still seeing the vultures at the moment, Rob?
Yes, I am.
Okay. It's gone on to the next one. Can you just tell me when you get to see the next one?
Will do.
And then as soon as you see this one, I'll already have changed it to the next one so that hopefully we catch up. Sorry about that.
Okay. We're still on the vultures, unfortunately. We're on to the next one.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna hit proceed for the next button. So at some point it'll disappear. So the Corey bustard, as I said, is the largest flying bird in southern Africa. And that said, it's an incredibly reluctant flyer. I've watched these things run a bit like a jumbo jet down a runway before eventually they might consider taking off. But they are fairly bulky, so I guess they could be forgiven for not really being so excited about taking off. They are listed as vulnerable, so on the IUCN list. They're listed as vulnerable in southern Africa, and that's due to mainly habitat loss. So as populations of humans increase and natural areas decrease, obviously these birds need specific sets of environments in which to live, and once those are removed, then that makes their survival threatened. So yeah, they are currently on the vulnerable list at the moment. I don't know if the next little bird has come up yet. It's the
brown little bird.
Yeah, it's a little puffball of a bird with a bright yellow eye. And this little chap is known as a Burchell's sandgrass. So there was a collector in the early 19th century called Burchell, and he described many species. So his name is carried by a number of different species. And what's interesting about this little sandgrass is that's a male, and they live in arid savannas. And what they do is they will go down to water. They usually go to drink at dawn and dusk. And they will soak their belly feathers, which are specially adapted, in the water. It acts as a sponge, and it then will take that soaked up water, it will fly with that extra water and that weight back to the nest where the chicks are, and the chicks will actually drink the water from the feathers. So because the distance to water can be considerable in these arid areas, the chicks wouldn't be able to make it. And so this is the way in which nature has facilitated the water to actually get to the chicks, which I think is pretty cool. The coloration, again, is what we call crypsis, and that is just to make it blend into its environment so that it's very difficult to see. It's a strategy of many ground birds. I don't know if you can see the next one now, which looks like a black umbrella gone wrong.
We can.
You can, okay. So the black umbrella gone wrong is actually a bird called a black heron. And this has an amazing strategy for catching its food. So what it's done there is it's created an umbrella, a shaded area. And then what it does is it has bright yellow feet. And it waves and swirls its bright yellow feet in the water. And what happens is fish are then attracted to this movement, and they're also attracted to the shade. And they can't see the reflection of the bird. And as a result, they get lured into this false sense of security, if you will, and the heron just snatches them up as they come in. Then what it'll do is it will close its wings, and it will walk a few more paces down along the edge of the bank, and it'll repeat the process. And so it has this incredibly unique foraging behavior that, yeah, allows it to get meals that perhaps it wouldn't if it didn't do so. The next picture that should have come up has a large pile of dung on it, along with two little brown and birds with red faces. You got those?
We're not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet. You've still got the bad hairdo umbrella.
We are looking at the umbrella bird right now, but we have now we see it. Two birds and a pile of dung.
Yeah, two birds and a pile of dung. So those two birds are known as Swainson's spurfowls. So they're also ground-living birds. And one of their strategies for getting food is that they will go and dig their way through a nice big pile of elephant or rhino dung, because it's full of seeds, which are undigested in the case of elephant dung. Elephants have a very inefficient digestive tract. 60% of what they consume basically comes out pretty much unprocessed. So plenty of nutrition in there for these little birds. Then they'll also find the grubs of dung beetles and other things once the dung has been lying around for a little while. And so very often you'll see them scratching around in these piles of dung, looking for whatever easy pickings they can. They, together with similar spurfowls and smaller birds called franklins, are called the heart attack birds of the bush. And the reason for that is when you're walking in Big Five country, what these little birds do is they wait until you almost stand on them, and then they fly up squawking like there's no tomorrow, and you as the guide are quite convinced that you've just stepped on a lion with cubs. So yeah, they've literally given many a trails guide a heart attack. Hence the name, the alternate name, the heart attack bird. But again, all of these little birds, ground-dwelling birds, are all vital parts of the ecosystem in terms of the relocation of nutrients and also helping to keep insect populations of things like flies and so under control because of their consumption of grubs. I'm not sure now, you should have a black bird with a red eye sitting on a twig. Cool. So this chap is known as a fork-tailed rongo, and the Shangaan name for this bird, so the Shangaan people live down in the low veld of South Africa. They call this little bird Mantengu, and that means the one who is wise about the bush. And it's a really appropriate name because this bird is into everything. It knows everybody's business. It is an extraordinary mimic. It can mimic pretty much any bird call it hears. It also learns to mimic non-bird calls. I've actually heard one doing a car alarm. So very intelligent. And what they will do is they follow big herbivores around and wait for them to flush up insects, which they then eat as the herbivore walks along. But what they've also learned to do is they've learned to mimic alarm calls. And so what will happen is those same little dwarf mongoose that were foraging along with the yellow-billed hornbill, this chap will come along. He'll give an alarm call, which means aerial predator, dive for cover. So the little dwarf mongoose will scurry off down into their burrows, and this chap will then swoop in and take whatever it was that they dropped as they were scurrying for cover. So yeah, a very clever little bird, and like I say, into everything. And I've also had situations when you're doing bushwalks with a group of people, because you are flushing insects, they will also follow you as you walk through the bush. So the next bird that should have come up is kind of pink, black and yellow.
It's there.
It's there. So this is a yellow-billed stork. So the yellow-billed stork is listed on IUCN as near threatened in southern Africa, again due to loss of habitat. They frequent inland waters, so they will take fish and small insects and so on. But again, habitat is being lost, and as a result, they become endangered. This beautiful pink coloration is not there all year round. This is actually breeding plumage. So they will obtain this pink coloration at the time of year, which we're coming into now in Southern Africa. We're going into our summer. So they get this beautiful pink coloration when they're in breeding plumage. And this, the yellow-billed stork here is doing what most birds will do in order to keep themselves clean, and that is it's preening itself. So it's smoothing out its feathers, it's removing any dust or dirt, and it's just generally getting everything in order so that its feathers are fully functional. So it's something that you would have seen pretty much any bird do at some point. Should have a little bird come up now. He's a little black and white, tiny, with a bit of red on his eye.
Not quite there yet. Maybe another.
I don't know if he's come up yet. Okay.
There he is.
So the yellow-billed stork, so we do get other storks in Southern Africa. We get things like Abdom stork, we get a black stork, and a number of others. And yeah, most of them will frequent areas that are have some level of water around them, because most of them have an aquatic portion to their lifestyle. Does the little guy come up yet?
The little guy is there.
Okay, so this little chap is actually quite special. These birds occur only in a very, very narrow band in South Africa, quite close to where I'm based at the moment in KwaZulu-Natal. It's a type of flycatcher. So there are many different flycatchers, which, as their name suggests, catch insects. And this little guy is called a black-throated wattle eye. So just special because it occurs in such a small area. And again, because of that, it also appears on the IUCN endangered list. One of the things to notice here is that this is one of what we would call a true perching bird. And you'll see it has 3 toes that are hooked forward and 1 toe that is hooked backwards. And so all birds that typically would sit on a branch have this arrangement of toes. And it has a locking mechanism on that back toe, which essentially allows them to grip the branch and also to sleep sitting on a branch without falling off. So that's typical of all of your perching types of birds. The bird that will come up next, probably hasn't come up yet, will also be a black and white bird, but a bird with much larger feet. And as you will see when it comes up, incredible talons on the ends of those feet.
We can see.
So clearly not a typical small perching bird. Obviously a raptor, a bird of prey. This is a kite. It's a black-shouldered, or sometimes called. So these are quite common within southern Africa as far as predatory birds go. So it's a predator of small rodents, also quite cosmopolitan in its diet. It will eat things like insects as well to supplement its diet. But it has that typical hooked bill, which allows it to rip up food. And then also these incredibly powerful feet that allow it to grab its prey with those talons. They also do something called aerial perching. It's often referred to as hovering. It's actually not true hovering because they can't actually move backwards. They can stay in one position, but they can't do what your North American hummingbirds do, which is basically move and rotate while they're hovering. So these guys literally are just perching in one spot in the air. And while they're doing that, they're obviously locating their prey, which they will then swoop down on and consume. So the next little guy that will come up is a brightly coloured blue and red bird with an incredibly long bill.
We can see
I don't know if you've got him yet.
He's there.
So this is a little malachite kingfisher. So this is one of our fish-eating kingfishers. So strangely, most of our kingfishers don't eat fish. They don't even live near water. They're actually insectivores. But this little one, along with things like the giant kingfisher, the pie kingfisher, pygmy kingfisher, they all are fish eaters. They're all pescivores. What I find incredible about these birds is anyone who's been on any extremely high-speed train, most especially the initial ones were the ones in Japan, you would have noted that those high-speed trains have got a very, very long tapered nose to them. And those are actually modeled on the bills of kingfishers. It's a discipline called biomimicry. And what happened was when they were developing these trains, when they were trying to get them to go through tunnels in built-up areas, they were getting a sonic boom because of the pressure buildup in front of the train. And obviously that wasn't something that they wanted. So what they did was they went and they looked for something that went from a less dense to a more dense medium without making a noise. and very little disruption. And what they found was that the kingfisher fitted the bill perfectly. And so what they did was they actually engineered those high-speed bullet trains on the structure of the kingfisher's bill. So there is a whole new discipline now, as I said, called biomimicry. And there are many things that are being investigated now and brought into modern technology that essentially were thought of by animals first. And as you can see, he's also a little proper perching bird. There's little 3 toes forward and there's 1 toe back. The next bird that should come up is a very tall black and white, black, white and red bird. I don't know if you've got it yet.
We do.
So this is a bird called a saddle-billed stork. And as you can possibly see, the name saddle-bill comes from that yellow saddle that sits right at the top of the bill. This is a female because she has yellow eyes and she also doesn't have any wattles, those fleshy pieces that often hang underneath a bill that many male birds have. The males have those wattles and they also have a dark eye. So these birds, again, are endangered. And the Kruger National Park for many decades now has had citizen science projects whereby when people have seen saddle-billed storks, they will actually record those sightings and report them, and if possible, support them with photographs. And so the whole idea behind it is to try and get as much information on them as possible in terms of their habitat requirements to see how best to be able to manage their environment and their habitat and therefore their existence. But they really are very beautiful birds. So the next one that's coming up has a bit of a strange pose of a bird. It's a dull brown bird with a yellow face. I don't know if you've got him yet.
Not quite, but I'm sure he'll show up soon.
I'm sure he's coming. So this particular bird, when it does come on your screen, is known as an African harrier hawk. It used to be known as a gymnogene. A lot of our birds' names have changed, and it's become a little confusing. Initially, it was done to bring South Africa back into line with global names of birds after the apartheid era. But more recently, it just seems that name changes and not scientific name changes, just common names. So I must confess, we all get a little confused sometimes as to what the latest bird name is. But the reason for showing you this bird is that it has a very unique hunting strategy. It also has a very strange behavior in that when it gets excited or it's about to take prey, that yellow facial skin turns bright pink. It looks like it's blushing. And it's a very strange thing because it happens very quickly. And I couldn't find any photographs of it. But yeah, it's quite amazing that it literally turns from yellow to pink. And if you have a look, it's got these very awkward looking legs. And that's because it clambers around in trees, in bushes, and it's a specialist in hunting chicks and eggs of other birds. It's also got a very small head relative to body size, and it's able to stick that head into all sorts of cavities to get to chicks. And one of its favorites is another bird that I will show you a little bit later, one of the weaver birds. And they frequently will go and raid weaver colonies and manage to pull out many eggs and chicks, which they then consume. So unlike other predators, not fly and pounce, these guys use kind of a mixture of clambering and stealth. To get to their food supplies. So as you've gone through this, the birds have all developed very specific strategies as they live, where they live, how they feed, what they feed on. And by doing this, they've managed to exploit all these individual ecological niches. That's why they're so incredibly diverse. Yes, they have the ability of flight, but they also have this ability to fit into a myriad of habitats, which allows them to occupy all sorts of different spaces. There should be two little black and white birds on the screen now. These are called white-eared barbets. Not the most inventive of names. Very clear when you see it that it has what looks like a white ear. But just to see, the barbets are hole nesting birds. They are capable of making their own nest holes, but they will also, if they find a hole that's either a naturally occurring hole or one left by a woodpecker, for example, they will move in. And they are mainly frugivores. They will eat fruit. They will also eat insects. And yeah, they're very much these hole-dwelling species. Many of them very colourful, all of them pretty noisy. This particular pair were actually outside my kitchen window. And when the youngster wanted feeding, it used to make the most awful racket until its parent came and fed it. So yeah, quite raucous, but yeah, also very intelligent little birds.
We're still seeing the hawk, Lorraine, so we're waiting for those cute little birds to come up.
Are you waiting for those cute little birds? Oh, I'm sorry. Tell me when the cute little birds come up.
I certainly will.
I'm sorry about the delays. It's very frustrating, I'm sure.
We're happy to have the technology, but it can be frustrating at times.
Yeah, no, sometimes it just doesn't do what it's meant to do. While we're talking about barbets and waiting for these guys to come up, there's two other barbets that are very commonly seen in this part of Africa, the crested barbet, and the other one is called a black-collared barbet. The crested barbet always looks to me like a 5-year-old got hold of a paint pot of different colours and just started daubing the bird. It had splodges of red and green and yellow all over it. So very colourful, has a very unique call. It's been described as it sounds like a stick stuck in a bicycle wheel. And yeah, it has this call that can go on for a very prolonged period of time. And then the other one, the black-collared barbet, what's interesting about that call is the male and the female use something called antiphonal duetting. And what that means is that it sounds like one call, but it's actually one bird calling and the other one answering. So there's a number of birds that do it. There's another one called a southern bobo, and they do this antiphonal duetting, which, if you didn't, sounds like one call that's being given by the bird. Have you got the little barbets yet?
Unfortunately, we are still on the hawk there.
Oh, I wonder why these little guys don't want to be seen. Sorry? Yeah.
I'm not sure why we're still waiting for the bobbits, but they just don't want to show.
They don't want to show. I'm wondering, I can just carry on, and then maybe you'll see the birds a little bit later.
Sounds good.
There's not a huge number left to go.
All right. People are telling me they're seeing different birds as well, so I think you should keep going.
Shall I just keep going?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So the bird that may or may not be showing is now a yellow bird with a black face and a bright red eye and a splotchy black back. And this is a bird called a village weaver. There's many different species of weaver in southern Africa, and all of them weave edible nests. So if you look at the size of the bird, it's probably it's just a little bit bigger than a sparrow. So not a particular grain, but yet it can weave this incredibly intricate design to make these nests. And the females are very fussy about their nests. So the males will build a nest, and then they will hang outside the nest and display frantically to the female to have a look at the house he's constructed. If she approves, she will move in. If she disapproves, she will leave, and the male will actually destroy the entire structure and go and start again somewhere else. And very often these males can build 3, 4, 5 of these nests in a breeding season, and in the hope that one of them will actually be considered suitable for the female to move in, and then to line. They will line it with feathers and anything else soft they can find, and then lay the eggs in it. You can see, if you can see the picture, there's long thorns that appear in the picture, and that's because they will very often make these nests right at the very end of thorny branches, and that's to stop predators, things like snakes and so on, being able to get in to the nest and steal the chicks. Unfortunately, it doesn't deter the African harrier hawk, which will still drop in and have a snack. The next little bird that will come up hopefully at some point is a sunbird, and it looks like it's sitting in a mixture of moss and twigs and leaves and seed. And basically what this is, it's a little female malachite, not a malachite, sorry. Yeah, it is a malachite sunbird, sorry. It's a little female. So the females are very drab. They don't have the beautiful coloration of the males. But what they do is they build these very intricate nests, which they disguise by daubing them with all these things like lichen and seeds and fruit. And it's all held together with cobweb. So they will go and they will actually harvest spider web, very often from things called community nest spiders. And they will then utilize this to hold together this elaborate structure that they make. There are other birds called helmet shrikes that have a special adaptation to feathers on their forehead that allow them to collect cobweb and then also utilize it for making their nests. And it's an interesting thing that is nest spiders. The spiderlings are often dispersed to form new colonies by the fact that they are taken by these birds and put onto a new tree. So yeah, they kind of get aerial transferred. So they don't have to balloon like other little spiders would. They get a free transfer. At some point, you will hopefully see a very cute little blue bird. He's powder blue, also pretty small, also sitting in a thorn tree. Hello?
Yeah, we're caught up with you, Lorraine.
Oh, you caught up with me, yay! Okay, so you've got the little powder puff.
Yes.
So this little guy, again, you'll see in a thorny bush. And what these birds do is they actually weave a little cup nest out of grass, which actually ironically is called blue seed grass. That's their favorite. And they will make that nest right in the middle of a thorn tree. Again, help stop predators getting to them. But they're even cleverer than that. What they will look to do is, if they can find a hornet's nest, they will then build, or a wasp nest, they will then build their nest right next to the wasp. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, it keeps telling me my audio has been lost. So I don't know how much of that you heard, but essentially they'll find, in this tree, they'll find a wasp's nest, and then right next to the wasp nest, they will actually build their little nest. So not only do they get protection from the thorns, they also get protection from the wasps, which will then sting anything that tries to come into the nest. What's interesting about it is that the wasps don't sting the bird. So somehow there seems to have been some development of this relationship that stops them from being stung by these wasps, which is really quite extraordinary.
Lorraine,
the next bird.
I'm sorry, Lorraine. Can you tell us what the name of that powder blue bird is?
Say again. Sorry.
Several of our guests would like to know what the name of the powder blue bird is.
Oh, what it is?
Yes.
Sorry, it's called a blue waxbill. Blue waxbill.
Thank you.
Then the next bird is a very strange looking bird, and it's called a hammerkop. And kop in Afrikaans is head. So essentially this bird is a hammerhead, and that's exactly what its head looks like. It lives close to water, and it's a specialist frog eater. So probably 3/4 of its diet is amphibians, and specifically frogs. It'll also take tadpoles, it will take other small fish and so on, but those are not its preferred food. It builds the largest nest for 2 birds, certainly in southern Africa, and it has been suggested even further afield. They build these enormous nests in the fork of big trees close to water. And the platform, so what they do is when they make the roof of this enormous structure, they have one bird inside and the other one outside, and the pair of them construct this roof such that it's so strong that a person can actually stand on it. And many things have been seen to use it. I've seen a leopard lying on top of one. Owls will often use them. So yeah, quite extraordinary for 2 birds that are probably about the size of a duck. And so, yeah, they build these specialized nests. They also pick up all sorts of very strange things to put into them. I once saw a car number plate that had been picked up enterprising Hammerkorb and popped into the nest. The bird here, just quickly, was just to show you iridescence in birds' feathers. So this is a bird called a red-winged starling, related to crows. It's a corvid, highly intelligent, gets up to lots of mischief, but has this beautiful sheen to the feathers, which sometimes will appear black, sometimes green. And this iridescence is actually caused by interference. So again, it's a structural effect, but it's not being caused by reflection like Tyndall light scattering is. It's more an interference of wavelengths, which then gives you this beautiful, this high sheen to the bird. So at some point you'll get two birds sitting on a branch, followed by one bird sitting on a branch which has a bright purple head, and then purple colouring along with a multitude of other colours. So this bird is a purple-crested turaco, and this bird is very special because these birds produce the only true green pigment in birds. So most other green pigments are basically a mix of carotenoids, which are your orange pigments, with an overlaying of melanin, so which gives you your olive colours. But these birds actually have green pigment called turaco or turaco, which was actually named specially after them. And so very interesting to me that of all the birds in the world, only the turacos are capable of producing this green pigment. So we get different species. There's a Neisner turaco, there's the purple crested, there's a number of others, but all very, very beautiful birds and all have these remarkable colours. Frugivores, so again, fruit eaters, and yeah, they're pretty messy eaters actually when they eat fruit. They make plenty of mess. The next one that should come up.
We are still stuck on the hammerhead, unfortunately.
Are you still stuck on a Hammerkorb? Some of them just don't want to move on. I don't understand.
I know, it's our technology.
I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna keep talking. I guess they'll catch up at some point. There's about, I think there's about 3 birds left. So I think, yeah, the pain is almost over. So when you've managed to get off the hammerhead and onto the turacos, after that, you will see a woodpecker. And this particular woodpecker is a golden-tailed woodpecker, and it's a female. And woodpeckers are incredible birds in so many ways. They're just so extraordinarily well adapted to their environment. If you have a look at the feet, when you do get to see it, you'll see it has 2 toes pointing forwards and 2 toes pointing backwards. Yeah, this foot structure is called a zygodactyl foot. And zygodactyl feet are specifically designed for clambering on things. You'll see one of the next pictures is an oxpecker. And oxpeckers also have zygodactyl feet because they clamber around on animals, combing for ticks to eat. So woodpeckers clamber around on trees, and essentially they're looking for insects and food. The tail feathers are specially stiffened, so they act as a prop, and they have a special joint, basically on their bill between their mandible and the rest of the skull, which acts as a shock absorber, because when they are drilling into wood, if that shock was just completely reverberated straight back into the brain case, they'd probably have a permanent concussion. So they actually have a special adaptation that allows for that. They also have a tongue that is incredibly long and sticky, which they can then put down into any holes they find, and actually the insects will stick to it as it is then able to pull them out of whatever hole it's trying to pull them out of. So incredibly well adapted. At some point you may see a cross-eyed buffalo, and the buffalo is going cross-eyed because it has a red-billed oxpecker sitting on its nose. And oxpeckers are for the most part beneficial because they eat parasites, extra parasites like ticks. They sometimes, however, become parasitic in their own right because they will keep wounds open in order to obtain blood, because that's what they're actually feeding on. The tick just contains the blood. And so sometimes they will actually, as I say, pick at scabs on wounds so that they can get a food supply, which is not overly beneficial to the animal. At some point, you'll see orange and black bird. It's got a long bill, and it's actually got some sort of cricket in its bill. This is an African hoopoe. And I just included it here because it has quite a unique feeding method. It goes along and it probes that long bill into the ground. And so it will walk along the ground probing to find its food. And yeah, what it pulled out in this case was a ground cricket. So the defense mechanisms of the chicks, so hoopoe kind of has a smelly connotation. The defense mechanism of the chicks is they're hole nesters, and if the chicks come under attack, they'll push their chests up against the back of the nest, lift up their tail feathers, and then spray whatever's coming at them with very unpleasant smelling stuff. So yeah, a bit of a smelly bird. And then this is the last slide when it eventually comes up for you. This is a male white-bellied sunbird. And again, it was just to show the remarkable adaptations of these creatures to their food source. You'll be able to see that it has this long, slender bill, which it's actually inserting into the flower. And it's perfectly designed. It's like a lock and key, that it can actually get its bill into these long, narrow corollas to actually get the nectar out. Very often, in so doing, they will land up getting pollen either on their face or on their bill. And when they move to the next flower, they will then act as a pollinator. So the nectar is actually the flower's way of attracting a pollinator. It's the reward, if you will, for pollinating the flower. And so, yeah, that's the males of these birds are all very pretty, coloured, iridescent. Females are all very drab, browns. And basically that's for survival. If you're brightly coloured, you stand out. There's a risk that you're going to get eaten. And if you're a female with chicks, you want to blend into your environment. And I know that, I'm sorry, you're probably a million slides behind still, but this is the last slide. And it's of some white-faced whistling ducks that are flying off into the sunset. So that's everything from me in terms of birds, as a kind of as an introduction, if you will, to Southern African birds. So I hope that it's been interesting, albeit a little frustrating with the slides. But yeah, that's all from me, Rob.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Before we start the question and answer period, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. And we do apologize for the technical difficulties, but we are so happy, Lorraine, that you are able to still give us a fascinating presentation. With that, here's a couple of questions for you. Now, is it only the male yellow-billed stork that gets the pink plumage during the breeding season?
No, actually, interestingly, the female also gets pink coloration. They both get pink coloration during breeding season.
Interesting. And now, for the harrier hawk, is there a season where they go after those chicks, and do they eat? What do they eat outside of that season?
Sorry, was that the African harrier hawk?
Yes.
So they will. I mean, they'll basically, if there are no chicks or nestlings, they will take other small. I mean, they'll take adult birds that they'll find nesting. They'll also, if they find small rodents in tree cracks or crevices, they'll take rodents. So yeah, they'll take other small birds and mammals if they can't get chicks and eggs.
Great, interesting. Now, can you tell us what the name of the blackbird with the red eye was? We missed that one.
Blackbird. Oh, the fork-tailed drongo.
Yes. Yes, thank you. We were wondering what that.
So it's a fork-tailed drongo, or the local language name for it is mantengu.
Aha, great. And now, what do you find that the hornbills will eat the foliage and the stems from the jacaranda trees? And is this plant is not native to South Africa? Somebody was asking, but they were just curious about the diet of the hornbills.
So hornbills are mainly they're mainly insectivores. So they will mainly eat insects. They will take some fruits and things like that. But the greatest part of their diet is large insects, really. They also quite like, you get some pods of trees called bush willows, and they get a very specific grub inside them at certain times of the year from a moth, and the hornbills are very partial to that. So jacaranda trees actually are native to South America, and if we have them in reserves, nature reserves, they're actually removed. But in cities or towns where you have hornbills, they might use them as nesting trees because they get quite big, but they wouldn't, there's nothing really around them from a vegetation point of view that they would feed on. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does, Lorraine. Thank you. Well, Lorraine, thank you so much. That's really the last question we have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you if you have any closing comments that you would like to make.
No, I don't think so, Rob, other than, yeah, to apologize for, we kind of still sometimes communicate with smoke signals here in Africa. Technology can be a bit of a menace. But yeah, just maybe to encourage people to spend time watching birds wherever they are in the world, because they're truly extraordinary animals. So, and just to enjoy them.
They sure are. Well, gosh, Lorraine, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. We really appreciate it. And I'd also like to thank everyone else who tuned in today. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. So with that, I will conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, thank you.